Welcome back to LukeTheTrader, and today we have Philip Gunst here for an interview. And it's great to have you on here, Philip. So could you just please introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about your background, perhaps?
Yeah, sure, Luke. Thanks for having me. So, as you mentioned, my name is Philip Gunst. I'm originally from Denmark, living in Copenhagen. Have a background, classical business school background from Copenhagen Business School. Been studying international business, and in the past 6 years, I've been working as a management consultant. And then last October, joined the third largest freight forwarder in the world, so transport and logistics company, working as a strategy manager. And then obviously the reason why I'm here, so I've been investing for the past decade or so, and very engaged about especially the commodity space.
Yeah, and that we are really excited about, especially about your insights into the commodity space. So what do you found most appealing in terms of commodities in the current market sentiment? Is it copper? Is it gold? Is it coal?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think obviously the market sentiment is a little bit tricky to get really wise about these days, because obviously the economy is doing pretty well across the board. However, we also been struggling a lot with inflation. I think in the current market with wars going on out there, I've been happy to have some sort of exposure towards gold and silver. However, we also know that the gold and silver miners are not doing tremendously in this market, even though the prices are at all-time high. So I've also had some pretty good stints with especially copper and also lithium, nickel in the past. But yeah, it's not really a secret that I'm heavily engaged in Colonial Coal, which is my biggest bet at the minute.
Yeah, and since you already said that it's your biggest position and that for a while, actually, could you please remind us of your thesis and perhaps state what still keeps you confident after months of holding it and just having no news, just hearing the CEO sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's not much communication going on to the retail space, so I could imagine that a lot of investors think it's a little bit tricky to be an investor and shareholder in Colonial Coal. No, but I got engaged back in 2020. Some odd fella reached out to me on LinkedIn of all places, said he had this interesting case in his drawer. He had been following me for Twitter for a while, liking what I did on especially a couple of copper names, and he reached out with this coal company. And I think as a young Danish guy, very especially in Denmark, sustainability is a huge topic, right? It's a little bit say off brand to start investing into the coal business. So I was a little bit hesitant initially, but I got introduced to David and got into the thesis, got to know what's up and down in terms of the assets that Colonial has, the entire jurisdiction in Peace River Coal in British Columbia. And yeah, just got to meet David a couple of times. And yeah, I've been a shareholder since, and especially in the past couple of years, I've been extremely heavily engaged, and I've just been adding to my position quite consistently over the past couple of years.
Especially Citibank probably helped you a little bit for your confidence in terms of holding the position, right?
Yeah, you can say obviously David is an extremely experienced fella, right? And also John, that's part of the team as well. Those two guys are probably one or two of the most prominent names in the especially the Canadian coal space. So I think it's a great confidence to have those on board. But obviously, since we're still around, David put the asset for sale 4 or 5 years ago, and we know the backstory. So, COVID and also the war in Ukraine has obviously changed the macro environment a little bit over time. But I think the fact that David hasn't managed to sell the asset has been a concern, and I must have also admit that I've sort of put my neck out a couple of times, indicating that I thought it would happen this quarter and maybe this quarter and this quarter. So it's been going on for a while, right? But getting Citi, as you mentioned, getting Citibank on board here in Q2 has been a game changer for me. I think it's very rare that you see a global investment bank like that engage with a junior on TSX, and I think that's a huge vote of confidence in David and the team, but also in the assets.
And stepping a little bit outside, what other positions are you excited about currently besides Colonial Coal, as mentioned?
Yeah, it's a little bit rare that especially given the size of my portfolio, but I'm actually all in Colonial more or less. I obviously have a
Mhm.
couple of follow positions, but I think looking back over the past couple of years, I've had a couple of core bets in some of the other commodities we briefly discussed. So Cabral Gold, a Brazilian gold explorer. I've had a pretty big position in that in the past. Also, Alta Copper, previously known as Candente, in Peru. So a copper name in Peru. Have
Mhm.
some of the largest asset packages, undeveloped asset packages in all of Latin America. So I think those are probably two of my core positions. And then you can say, obviously, you pick up a few names throughout time, right?
Mhm.
Just by being on social media, following some of the other shareholders, also holding some of the names you're in. So Warren Irvin, for instance, a great guy that I hugely admire and also respect. Premium Nickel, also a name
Mhm.
that has become on my radar. And I think then from back in the days when I started investing in Canada, I actually also invested in a company called Patriot One Technologies, now called Extract, which is a security and defense company that's really been doing well for the past 6 to 9 months
Mhm.
with new management. So there's a couple of names out there, but to be completely honest with you, Luke, what I'm all focused at the minute is Colonial Coal and getting that
Mhm.
long-awaited exit that we're waiting for.
Mhm. And since you have already at a game for some quite a while, what have been your biggest winnings, and could you perhaps detail how what your ways are to finding them?
Yeah, sure. So I think in newer time, there's no doubt that Colonial Coal is the one that has been my biggest win. So I invested in Colonial Coal when it was only at 50 cents, and it went to 370 back in 21. So I think that whole ride
Mhm.
is probably one of the yeah, craziest rides I've ever had with a stock, 600% in less than 6 months time. So that was pretty amazing, and something that's
Mhm.
definitely made my portfolio rather robust. I think in the past, I started investing in gold in 2018 when the gold price was $1,200 per ounce. So actually,
Mhm.
I invested in a couple of gold producers back then. So some of the majors, Barrick Gold, for instance, and did a pretty good investment there as well. So I think most of my big wins in the past actually relates to the commodity space, and whether it's been in oil and gas with a couple of Scandinavian names, or whether it's been in the Canadian space. I think the commodities have always been where I've managed to find some edges, and also been able to stock pick.
Mhm. And why is it that you find the mining sector more appealing compared to the other ones, judging by your allocation of funds?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a little bit of a bias, you can say, related to it. So obviously, when I started investing in the commodity space back in 18, you come into a little bit of a community as well. I think on
Mhm.
Twitter there is a huge moving and a huge community around the commodity space, especially gold and silver, but also increasingly copper, nickel, lithium, and some of these rare earth metals. So I think that's where it all started, and how sort of became hooked by it. Then I think especially the entire exchange around it in Canada, right? So even though the
Mhm.
TSX and also the Toronto exchanges has been not very attractive for retail investors in the past couple of years, because the volume has just been going down more or less,
Yeah.
especially after COVID. I think it's a huge market for it, and if you sort of manage to find those few names where you actually have an edge, I think there's a huge upside also, because sometimes you see that the volatility, the volume can move stocks quite a bit. So it is also possible, if you position yourself rather early, which is very much linked to how I like to invest
Mhm.
fundamentally, you're definitely able to pull things off. But why the mining space and not tech, or why not China, or why not cannabis? I think it's a good question. I think it's probably just bias. Having been in the space for the past
Mhm.
5 or 7 years, it's just difficult to get out again, and also you need to build a capability. You need to build a toolbox around how you like to invest. And having been in the space for the past 5 to 7 years, it just becomes a little bit of a habit that you know what to look for. You know what to look for in the management. You know what to look for in the assets. Know what to look for in terms of what they do investor relations wise. So I think it's just a matter of building that capability, and then trying to move to another sector would be tough, because it can vary quite a bit from how you do it in the mining sector.
And are you staying more on the producer side of things, or are you also looking into explorers and perhaps the assays itself and the mineralization?
Yeah, sure. No, I actually like both sides of the convolute, you can say. I've been I'm engaged in a junior, very junior, so like staking level, doing field program stuff like that. I'm engaged as an independent director, and I like that. You can say it's very much a different game, because you are more focused on how you can actually stake those assets and how you can build a portfolio, building the right team. While you can say on the other side of things, with especially with producers, it's more a matter of jurisdiction. It's a matter of you can say matter of management. It's a matter of actually being able to have robust assets and put that to production. And now just taking an example from the coal space, with what's happened with both Longview but also Grosvenor in the past few days, you just see that diversification is just so important, right? So when you move into producing assets, but obviously also in the exploration space, it's just such a fragile environment. And imagine Anglo, that's been having their met coal division for sale now, and all of a sudden one of their core producing assets in Australia, top of the class in terms of the quality of the coal, and now they might be able to just wave goodbye to those 3 or 4 million tons a year, which obviously also will impact their valuation.
And let's talk a little bit about Colonial and your other positions. Well, how do you master sort of the psychology side of things when it comes to a buy and hold approach in some of your holdings? Let's say Colonial, you have those big swings up, but also those big swings down, as well as in the uranium space. We saw it the past few weeks. It always happens in the commodity space, right?
Yeah, no, psychology is extremely important. And I think I started investing back in 2014 or so. So it's been a decade for me. And I think I was really a young fella back then. I was only 17, 18 years old. And I think that was probably the toughest learning for me, was the psychology part of things. It's so difficult to see your money disappear. And I think that's probably also the tricky part about investing, is that is related to your personal economics, right? Your personal capital. So I spent a lot of years getting a little bit hard-skinned in the sense that I took a lot of hits, and I really had some bad experiences losing also 100% of position, right? Having several names actually where they became halted and was delisted and never came back because management was fraudulent, for instance. So those learnings sort of got to me, and I think having been through that, I think you become a little bit more tough, and I think you also learn to rest a little bit more in the day-to-day swing. So obviously investing in the TSX exchange and seeing those huge volatility spikes, as you're also talking about, both ups and downs. If you're not interested in selling and trading, I think it doesn't really matter. It's a matter of keeping eye on the price. And in the sense of Colonial, obviously it's a matter of looking at what's the exit thesis, and is that changing with what's going on around the company, right? And when the stock went to $3.10 this year, I didn't even think about selling. And I think the same goes for, obviously, having been a long-term hold and also believing in the thesis. Whenever the stock dips, I see it as an opportunity to buy. So having that buy and hold obviously comes with some psychology, and you need to be also realistic about the unrealized gains that you might get throughout that period. It's nothing worth, right? It's only the day that you decide to sell that it's worth something.
And as you already talked a little bit about sort of fraudulent management, how are you, for example, fact checking that side of things? Because it's information is scarce, and sometimes the websites, they're just misleading on some companies.
It's tough, Luke. It is really tough, and obviously, I think let me just give a very tangible example. So I was on exchange in London back in 2018. I was investing in an American company that was doing. It was a real estate company that also had a technology arm. They were doing Internet of Things, and it got into the name. I like the management. I like the product. I like the business
Mm-hmm.
model. Build a little bit of the same relationship that I have with David Austin today. I built that with the CFO and the CEO of the company. So actually 40, no, not even 48, I think 18 hours before the stock was halted,
Mm-hmm.
and a press release was coming out that the SEC was investigating the management of the company. 18 hours
Mm-hmm.
before that happened, I was on a conference call with the CFO CEO saying everything was fine, and they were doing everything to get the stock up. So I think it's also a matter of trust, right? And whether you believe in people. Fact checking can be tricky, and even now with
Mm-hmm.
David, I have the utmost respect for David. He's a brilliant guy. He's super experienced. I've learned a lot from him. But obviously, also David, he has his own interest, right? David wants to also facilitate a dialogue with his shareholders, and his
Mm-hmm.
say performance is also measured on how the share price is doing. So he also wants to sweet talk me a little bit, and you need to be able to see through that when you're talking with these
Mm-hmm.
people, because they have an interest. They want in my case, I have like 10,000 followers on Twitter, so some of these CEOs sometimes also using me to get access to that group of people in order for
Mm-hmm.
them to push the stock, right? So I think, and
Mm-hmm.
that also goes for you with your podcast and your videos on YouTube, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are utilizing that to build a little bit of a following, and start building some momentum in the stock, and you need to be able to see through that. So fact checking can be tough. I think for me, it is very much a matter of multiple things. So if you don't have the
Mm-hmm.
assets, if you don't have the management, if you don't have the clear strategy, if you don't have a robust equity structure, all of those things in combination, that's what makes a good case for me. And
Mm-hmm.
management is only part of that. So even though you might be able to sweet talk me, you can also fall on some of the other parameters.
Mm-hmm. So being picky is very important, especially in the
Very
commodity space.
Very important. And I think for me, deprioritizing investment thesis is more important than prioritizing. You cannot be in everything. And that was especially also one of my learnings from the past when I was younger. I wanted to buy everything. I wanted to have a small position in
Mm-hmm.
everything. While that's a huge contrast to my position in Colonial Coal today, where I'm all in. And that's a huge indication of my conviction in the case, but also all of the legwork I'm doing on a weekly basis, talking to
Mm-hmm.
David, talking to some of the other shareholders, constantly looking at the news, so on and so forth. So I think it's very much about being picky, and I think it's a matter of deselecting those 99 cases to
Mm-hmm.
pick that one case that then will
Mm-hmm.
be your winner, right?
Mm-hmm. And sort of when when do you have like a case of when you're saying, okay, this is it for me. I'm out in whatever stock it is. I don't want to hold it any longer. I just have to dish it out.
So what's the question? Sorry.
Like when do you reach like a level where
When?
you say, okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, good question. I think it's tough, and that's probably again back to the psychology of things. I think that is where it gets tricky, right? Because you've dedicated so much of your time and your resources into investing in this case. So being able to just throw it out by the garbage, I think that's extremely tough.
Mm-hmm.
I have had a couple of occasions where it's happened. I think I've probably been blessed that it's been a comparison or a prioritization towards other cases. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
whether investing in Colonial was a prioritization to sell Caporal, for instance, and I think sometimes you get a little bit helped by that. But I must also admit that it has been something that I've had a tough time with in the past. But as long as your investment thesis, or at the time where your investment thesis changes for good, you need to
Mm-hmm.
be trustworthy towards your own governance model, right? And for me, it's when those parameters at some point change from having had a tick mark to at some point now being questionable, or even that you don't like it anymore. Whether it's the asset, whether it's the jurisdiction that's changing on a political level, whether it's the management that changes, you just need to be trustworthy towards your own model and your own governance.
Mm-hmm. And on sort of a more personal level, what did lead you to choosing a career in strategy and perhaps doing stock picking in a market that requires a lot of work?
No, good question. I think when I was studying at the university and at Copenhagen Business School back in 2016, 2017, I think if you asked me back then, there was no doubt that I wanted to be an investment banker, go to
Mm-hmm.
London, go to New York, sit at the trading desks. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the guys, also yourself, I think
Mm-hmm.
most people enjoy that world, or at least if you've seen Wolf of Wall Street and think that's a cool movie, you probably think that you wanna go to the trading desk, right? But I must also admit, I think it was a very deliberate choice for me. I didn't like the culture, even though
Mm-hmm.
I've been used to working a lot of hours in management consulting as well. I wasn't into, say, compensating in that way with 100
Mm-hmm.
hours weeks, and you're just a number in the queue. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted something that was a little bit more tangible, and I think what's been a strength for me really is that strategy consulting gives you a little bit more of a rounded profile. You get to know the toolbox of also how you're screening companies, and I think that's been a huge advantage for me. And then you can say going into the stock market, that there was no it was a no-brainer for me, because I like to invest, and I wanted to keep doing that, and I thought I could do that bilaterally with having the job I had. I think the only change that's been on that journey was that back in 19, when I finished my studies, I was investing a lot. I was also trading a lot. While I
Mm-hmm.
think the model I changed towards after 19 was that I wanted to have a few holdings only, but
Mm-hmm.
also putting a lot of effort into understanding those cases. And I think that's really the strategy I've been following ever since.
Mm-hmm. And as it is already the end, unfortunately, I have to say thanks for attending, Philip, and it was great listening to you. And until next time, I guess.
Thank you so much, Luke. Appreciate it.